Imagine waking up one morning to headlines that redraw maritime borders, threaten energy projects, and force millions to reconsider what stability even means on an island that has been split for half a century. Welcome to Cyprus, where tensions, political fault lines, and regional uncertainty are not abstract geopolitics, but the stuff that changes people's lives, investments, and the map on the wall. If you care about the future of the Eastern Mediterranean, its energy, its people, and its openings for business, travel, or a new life, subscribe to Cyprus Real View now and hit the bell, because what follows is the single uninterrupted narrative you need to understand what's happening, why it matters, and what might come next. The whole island, from the sun-baked beaches to the halls of power in Nicosia, Lefkosia, Ankara, Beirut, and Brussels, is caught inside a tangle of old grievances and new stakes, natural gas discoveries that could reshape economies, elections and leadership shifts that change negotiating positions overnight, competing legal claims over exclusive economic zones that turn sea charts into bargaining chips, and the ever-present shadow of outside power politics, all of it creating friction, sudden risk, and opportunity. Start with energy. In the last few years, the discovery of major offshore gas fields in the Eastern Mediterranean turned maritime lines into strategic prizes, and this November a long-awaited maritime demarcation deal between Lebanon and Cyprus was formalized in Beirut, a deal designed to unlock offshore energy exploration and to help Lebanon confront a devastating economic crisis by opening the door to possible gas development. That move was hailed by many as historic and commercially consequential because it seeks to bring previously frozen waters into play for exploration and potential export. AP News Plus E1. But any time a capital signs a deal over the sea around Cyprus, tensions flare. And this one was no exception. Ankara immediately denounced the Lebanon-Cyprus deal as unacceptable, arguing that it ignored the rights and claims of Turkish Cypriots and warning regional actors not to legitimize unilateral actions taken by the Greek Cypriot South without consultation. That response made plain how maritime energy deals instantly become political flashpoints on an island already divided since 1974. Reuters. Behind these official statements is a deeper reality. The Cyprus problem is not just an argument about who rules what territory. It is a knot of legal claims, historical memory, demographic anxieties, security calculations, and external patronage. The Republic of Cyprus in the south is an EU member state that insists it represents the whole island in international law. The Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, TRNC, in the north is recognized only by Ankara and relies heavily on Turkish economic and security support. When the south signs an EZ arrangement or an energy pact with neighbors, Turkish officials and many in the north see it as bypassing the Turkish Cypriot community's rights and as a unilateral attempt to lock in advantage, and that perception, rightly or wrongly, can convert an energy prospect into a diplomatic crisis. Ekathimerini +1. In 2025, the political deck was reshuffled. Northern Cyprus voted for new leadership that campaigned on engagement and a return to negotiation over hardline separatist options, an outcome many analysts labeled a potential opening for restarting UN-backed reunification talks, or at least confidence-building measures between the communities. But outcomes remain uncertain because Ankara's posture, domestic politics in Greece and Cyprus, and regional dynamics are all powerful variables. The October 2025 presidential election in the north produced a leader whose orientation leans more toward a federal solution, a fact that surprised many and immediately altered the diplomatic calculations in Nicosia, Ankara, and Brussels. Financial Times +1. That electoral change is a classic example of how domestic politics on the island can ripple outward. A pro-engagement leader in the north raises hopes of resuming peace talks, which in turn affects what the EU, Turkey, and neighboring states will condition on progress. And it changes the leverage around economic projects that depend on cross-party or cross-community cooperation. Yet, simultaneously, Ankara has continued to signal its own preferences loudly. President Erdogan publicly restated that a two-state solution is realistic and argued that years of failed talk-based diplomacy had proven certain frameworks ineffective, a position that hardens one side of the debate and complicates mediation efforts. The tension between renewed optimism in the north and Ankara's insistence on certain red lines creates an uneasy mix of opportunity and fragility. Progress is possible, but easy to reverse. Reuters +1. The regional picture makes Cyprus's internal debate even more precarious. The Eastern Mediterranean is now a crowded strategic theatre. Israel, Egypt, Lebanon, Greece, Turkey, and the EU have overlapping interests in gas, routes, and alliances, and every new pipeline idea, floating LNG project, or license auction can shift incentives toward cooperation or competition. International energy firms are watching closely, and investment decisions hinge on stability and enforceable legal frameworks. When companies sense political risk, naval standoffs, conflicting maritime claims, or a breakdown in dialogue, they either exit or demand higher returns, slowing development and reducing the economic benefits that might otherwise help resolve political bottlenecks. Reuters +1. For residents and would-be investors, the immediate implications are practical and pressing. Property markets, tourism flows, and foreign direct investment are all sensitive to political headlines. A single maritime agreement or a flare-up of rhetoric can spike insurance costs, freeze lending, or deter tourists. For local business owners and expatriates thinking of moving to Cyprus, the message is not that the island is about to implode. Cyprus remains in many ways calm and hospitable, but rather that volatility is part of the operating environment and smart planning must account for it. Insurers, banks, and large developers often view the South and North differently. EU law and membership in the Republic of Cyprus brings protections and access to markets that the North does not enjoy formally, and that legal distinction filters into everyday economic life. Meanwhile, the TRNC's heavy reliance on Turkish funding and imports, plus the presence of Turkish military forces, means any shift in Ankara's priorities or economic health can translate directly into local instability in the north. OSW Ośrodek Studiów Wschodnich Przekształceń. Look at how quickly narratives shift. One week, the conversation is about energy cooperation and the possibility of new export routes to Europe. The next week, Brussels is talking about conditionality on Turkey's EU ambitions and even possible sanctions related to actions in the Eastern Mediterranean. EU-Turkey relations are closely tethered to progress on Cyprus, and the EU has repeatedly made clear that any modernization of the customs union, visa facilitation, or broader rapprochement with Ankara will depend on constructive movement on the Cyprus issue, which gives Nicosia leverage but also raises the stakes for how each side talks and negotiates. That leverage fuels both incentives for compromise and incentives to harden positions, depending on who believes they can gain more by waiting or by acting. PA Turkey +1. The security dimension is real and persistent. Naval patrols, sometimes provocative exercises, and public statements about maritime rights keep tensions simmering. Past history, the 1974 intervention, the deployment of troops, and the succession of failed peace efforts means trust is deeply eroded, and any new initiative must overcome decades of suspicion. Meanwhile, external actors, NATO members, EU capitals, and regional players watch and occasionally tip the scales through diplomatic pressure, security cooperation, or public statements. As a result, a single misstep on the maritime frontier or in a negotiation draft can rapidly escalate into a diplomatic standoff or a freeze in talks that had only just restarted. The Lebanon-Cyprus EEZ agreement, for instance, was meant to unlock exploration after years of delay, but its signing triggered immediate objections from Turkey and raised questions about whether energy cooperation can proceed without a parallel political process that accounts for Turkish Cypriot claims. AP News +1. For ordinary people living on both sides of the divide, The human consequences are layered: mobility across the Green Line, property disputes, the enforcement of legal judgments, and the question of citizenship or residency rights all remain contested. Any negotiation that tries to solve the big political questions must also provide practical arrangements for people, farmers, shopkeepers, students, and retirees whose lives depend on consistent rules and the ability to move, trade, and access services. Without trust-enhancing measures, even the best legal frameworks risk faltering during implementation. The political rhetoric about sovereignty and rights often obscures these quotidian concerns, yet they are the true test of whether any settlement will hold. Cyprus Mail +1. The economic calculus pushes in two directions at once. On the one hand, gas revenues and energy export potential offer a real chance to transform public finances, fund infrastructure, and foster regional cooperation. The Lebanon-Cyprus agreement is an example of countries trying to tap that promise after years of delay. On the other hand, the presence of valuable resources raises the cost of compromise. If one side thinks gas could finance autonomy or strengthen its bargaining position, willingness to accept a federal solution that dilutes control may drop. Add to that the regional bargaining over pipelines, LNG terminals, or shipping routes. Each proposal touches the strategic interests of more than one state. And you have a situation where energy geopolitics can either become the carrot for peace or the prize that deepens division. Discovery Alert +1. So what are plausible scenarios from here, and how should observers think about risk? First, there is the cautious optimism track: pro-engagement political leaders, international mediation, UN, EU facilitation, and pragmatic incentives tied to energy cooperation could produce incremental confidence-building measures. Eased crossing rules, property claim mechanisms, joint environmental monitoring for offshore fields, or coordinated search and rescue reforms that gradually rebuild trust and stall the most dangerous escalatory dynamics. If this path holds, energy projects become a platform for cooperation rather than a trigger for conflict, and the island could see a multi-year process of negotiated settlement that preserves community rights while opening economic benefits. The recent election in Northern Cyprus and some diplomatic signals from the Republic of Cyprus suggest this is not an impossible route, but it requires careful sequencing and guarantees. Second is the frozen conflict track. Headline diplomacy continues. New agreements are signed between the south and neighbouring states. Ankara objects loudly, and Europe dangles conditional incentives that fail to convert into concrete movement. Negotiations drift. Energy companies adopt wait-and-see postures or invest only in southern waters. The north feels increasingly dependent on Ankara, and the underlying status quo persists with periodic spikes of tension. This track is stable in appearance but risky because it leaves many fault lines unresolved and vulnerable to sudden shocks. A naval incident, a provocative legal ruling, or a change in domestic politics in Turkey, Greece, or Cyprus that hardens positions. Third is the escalation track, less likely but not impossible. Intense diplomatic breakdowns produce sanctions, maritime incidents, or greater military posturing in the eastern Mediterranean, scaring off external investment, spiking insurance and borrowing costs, and dramatically reducing the island's economic prospects. This scenario would be the most damaging to daily life and to any long-term solution. And it is the one all major actors publicly claim to want to avoid. The truth is that the probability of each scenario depends less on a single event and more on the ability of leaders to manage expectations, sequence concessions, and bring international partners into enforceable frameworks. Financial Times +1. For entrepreneurs, homeowners and travelers, the practical advice is straightforward. Treat Cyprus like any geopolitically sensitive market. Diversify risk, ask for legal certainty, use local counsel who understands cross-border property and maritime law, and keep contingency plans for mobility or changes in regulatory regimes. For content creators and investors, the headlines are a double-edged sword. Volatility fuels views and interest, which is why channels like Cyprus Real View attract attention, but it also means reputational risk if reporting or projects ignore the human realities on the ground. For policymakers and diplomats, the implication is that technical agreements on energy must be accompanied by political roadmaps for inclusion. Energy deals that leave communities feeling bypassed are eventually contested, and technical cooperation without parallel social arrangements tends to be fragile. Trade and economic security +1. What should international stakeholders do? First, keep nudging for inclusive talks where Turkish Cypriots are full participants, not passive observers. Legitimate, durable agreements need buy-in from communities, not only from capitals. Second, tie energy investments to clear, enforceable benefit-sharing mechanisms and environmental safeguards. The promise of revenues can support reconciliation if they are transparently managed and equitably distributed. Third, prepare crisis management channels, direct military-to-military and diplomatic hotlines, pre-agreed protocols for maritime incidents, and third-party monitoring of contested activities can convert flashpoints into manageable incidents rather than triggers for escalation. Fourth, the EU and UN should use the leverage they have, from customs union incentives to targeted development funding, to reward concrete steps that enhance mutual trust while being ready to sanction actions that actively undermine talks. These are the kinds of calibrated, multi-tool responses that can turn a tense status quo into a pathway for de-escalation. PA Turkey +1. Cultural and social threads also matter. Decades of separation have created parallel narratives about identity, security, and history. Any long-term settlement must include education exchanges, joint cultural projects, and the slow, often awkward work of people-to-people reconciliation. Tour operators, artists, and civil society organizations can be quiet but powerful drivers of trust by building networks that transcend politics and remind both communities of common interests in prosperity, safety, and the island's environment. The role of journalists and content creators is critical too. Nuanced, locally informed coverage helps foreign audiences see the difference between rhetorical posturing and the practical compromises that make life better for ordinary people. And it prevents escalation driven by misunderstanding or deliberate misinformation. Euronews +1. Now, what to watch for in coming months? 1. Whether the Republic of Cyprus and TRNC pursue any formal confidence-building measures after the northern election. 2. Whether Turkey keeps pressing a two-state narrative at high diplomatic levels or finds it politically expedient to temper rhetoric in favor of pragmatic cooperation. 3. Implementation steps coming out of the Lebanon-Cyprus Maritime Agreement and whether Turkish objections translate into concrete diplomatic actions or remain statements meant to preserve negotiating leverage. 4. Any moves by EU institutions linking customs union modernization or other incentives to tangible progress on Cyprus. And 5. How energy companies and financiers respond. If they sign sizable contracts or commit capital, the economic momentum could force political compromises. If they hold back, the economic carrot loses power. Each of these signals will shift the balance between the optimistic cooperation, frozen conflict, and escalation scenarios described earlier. AP News +1. For viewers of Cyprus Real View who want to stay informed, here are concrete steps you can take. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss on-the-ground reporting and analysis as situations evolve. Follow both Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot local news sources to get multiple perspectives. When assessing investment opportunities, insist on legal opinions that consider both sides' claims and support civil society organizations that promote cross-community projects because long-term peace is built as much in community centers and classrooms as it is in diplomatic conference rooms. And if you're planning a visit, know that most of Cyprus remains peaceful and welcoming, but keep an eye on travel advisories and local guidance if tensions spike. Being informed is the best way to enjoy and support the island safely. Finally, if you found this narrative useful, support this channel. Like, share, and comment below. Your engagement helps us keep producing deep, evidence-based coverage of Cyprus and the Eastern Mediterranean, in a region where a single headline can change the economics of a community and the fate of negotiations. Staying informed, skeptical of easy narratives, and attentive to both political signals and human stories is the most stabilizing act any of us can perform. Subscribe to Cyprus Real View for weekly updates, on-the-ground voices, and clear explainers that cut through the noise. And if you want a deep dive on any of the threads I mentioned, energy, property, tourism, or political scenarios, tell us in the comments and we'll make a focused episode. Thank you for watching, stay curious, and remember, in Cyprus, history and headlines meet on the shoreline. Understanding both is the only way forward. Use a male, middle-aged British voice for the narrator.